Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Ankerstar Wealth Morning Show. We have a special guest today, David Delisle. You can see his page in the background. I will walk you through that here in a second. But David is going to talk to us this morning for about 30 minutes or so, maybe 45, about money mindfulness, about the importance of awesome stuff. In terms of intro, I've got like pages of stuff I could tell you about David, but I'll just say he's a successful entrepreneur, financial advisor, marketing director, and real estate investor as well, but most importantly, a dad. And I resonate with that as well. So, David, welcome to the show.
So excited to be here, Steve.
Awesome. Well, before we get started, as a financial education presentation, so you have to do your own due diligence for acting upon anything you hear in this presentation. More disclaimer information is available at ankerstarwealth.com. And the opinions expressed are Mike, Steve's, and David's alone. With that, let me kind of walk you through his website here. You can see at the top, he is a speaker. He's a keynote speaker. He's a best-selling author. If you want to see pictures of David on TV, there's some videos down there. And then there's the kind of the front of the room shot. He does have a book that I have in my hand here, holding it up. He's got the Golden Quest, Your Journey to a Rich Life. And a lot of that is to help kids learn about money. So with that, Mike, before we get started, I want everybody to, if you have a question for David, I want you to go ahead and ask it in the chat room. And I will be monitoring that and kind of facilitating the presentation. And Mike, our Chief Investment Officer, will be asking most of the questions. So with that, Mike, I'll turn it over to you. Why don't you go ahead and ask the first question?
All right, all right. When I hear money mindfulness and geared towards youth, and I know I've got five between 14 and 21, so I'm like, man, probably should have been reading this book years ago. But money mindfulness, what is the definition of that?
Yeah, so it's funny. So when people think about money, typically their questions are always like, how do I have more money? How do I save more? How do I invest? But your relationship to money is so important. And to me, is the most important first lesson and foundation of any financial literacy. And so money mindfulness is just being a little bit more present and aware of your relationship to money, of what's really important to you. And so the way I define it, I like to think about, what brings you joy? And it's something I call the awesome stuff. So what's your awesome stuff? And so the mindfulness piece is just when you're thinking of buying something, rather than thinking, should I or shouldn't I, just start pausing for a moment and ask the question, is this my awesome stuff? And that pause and that reflection and thinking about it and noticing it, it sounds so simple, but that practice, it doesn't matter what the answer is, that practice will change almost everything. And the reason for that, and I've seen this time and time again, it's happened for me as well. The more we focus on what really brings us joy, the more we realize what doesn't. And what we'll quickly realize is, or what you'll quickly realize, what I quickly realized, is that most of the things that we spend our time and money on don't actually bring us joy. And so when you think of that rat race and like endlessly chasing more, and doesn't matter how much you have, you're immediately thinking the next thing, or that thing you really want to buy, and then as soon as you get it, you're already thinking the next thing to buy. This mindfulness really changes that because it really puts things into perspective of what's important to you, and that chase stops.
It's great. Now, as far as a parent, but also this applies obviously to us that are probably logged in here. What would be something we would tell our kid or suggest to our kid to kind of move them down that path of mindfulness besides reading the book?
Yeah, so that question is important. So if we got in the habit of just asking that question, is this your awesome stuff? And having a conversation around it so they understand what that means to you, what that means to them, and that it's going to be different for everybody. So I envision, for example, when we see that kid, you know, pleading for an ice cream, rather than saying we can't afford it, which has its own massive repercussions, simply looking at them and asking, is that your awesome stuff? And letting that child pause and reflect. Because that pause and reflection is what we want to learn as adults. And how this manifests, and again, this was a bit of a practice, and I wasn't sure, and I'm a dad, so I'm watching my kids. A lot of the financial literacy I teach them is based around this, because I don't want to beat them over the head with financial literacy because I'm their dad and I talk about this stuff. So they would do the exact opposite if I talked about stocks and bonds and investing all the time. But I do encourage this concept of the awesome stuff. Is that your awesome stuff? And then things for myself. This is what my awesome stuff is. Or noticing, when I purchase something that maybe isn't my awesome stuff, and I'm like, you know what? I thought this was, and it isn't. And what happens from that? Like I asked my younger guy who's now 12, that's going to do a talk at his school, and I was just asking, like, why don't you care what your friends have? Why aren't you trying to have all the toys they have, or jealous of the things, or want? I actually didn't word it that way, but just, most of the kids, they're constantly looking at their peers and wanting to keep up with the Joneses. And he was like, it's like, he just looked at me, he's like, it's because I know what I love, and that's not it. It was as simple as that. And that's the beauty of this conversation, of just making them aware and having that mindfulness. It really will. We talk about wanting our kids to just not be influenced by social media and chasing and chasing and chasing. This is the way to do it. And it's so simple.
Yeah, I was gonna, if I can hop in for just a second, Mike. Yeah, I was gonna ask you specifically about social media. I mean, we all, as parents, it's kind of like everything's bad, 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 but are there upsides to social media and some of the financial education stuff that may be floating out there?
Well, access to information. I mean, that's just like the internet. People have talked about how that's bad and all these other things. But the access to information, I mean, that's huge. That's super, super powerful. The downside, like I said, like there's massive upsides with information. It's just that where that information is coming from. So that massive amount of information also means there's a massive amount of influence, especially if we think of things like keeping up with the Joneses. So that happened in past generations. It's always happened, but we might be comparing ourselves to our neighbor or our friends, not everybody in the world. So that influence now that we're seeing is really big. And I was just talking about this recently with a news station. Over 40% of Gen Zs relate to, like, consider themselves to have money dysmorphia, which is basically a disconnect from their actual financial reality and the real reality. And that disconnect has grown. So in past generations, it might have been, 12% and 14%. And now we're seeing like millennials are over 40%, Gen Zs are even higher, and it's increasing. And it's because of that influence from social media, of this is what we have, like seeing what everyone has and feeling insecure, lower self-worth, and that you just can't have those things.
Mm-hmm. Now, what are some of the interesting responses when you say awesome stuff? And I mean, I could think of awesome stuff to me, but what are some of the interesting responses that you get of awesome stuff to, let's say, Gen Z or younger generations?
So you get everything. Like kids, they'll say all sorts of stuff, and it's running shoes, it's Pokemon cards. My son, it's Slurpees. Like it's across the board. But a great example of how powerful this is for the listeners. So I had someone who read the book to their kids, and at the time their kids really wanted to get a puppy, and that was their awesome stuff. And we can all relate with that. Like, I mean, I love dogs. Most people love dogs. Kids love dogs. So we can relate with the awesome stuff being the puppy. And it was for them in that moment. But the dad then said to them, you know what? For me, my awesome stuff, mom really wants to go back to school. She's been wanting to go back to school, and it's really expensive. And those kids, as soon as they saw sending mom to school or having the puppy, the choice was clear for them. And they're like, let's send mom to school. And this is what I mean by focusing on what brings you joy. They realized, they thought it was the puppy, and it was. They still wanted the puppy, but it wasn't even close to sending mom to school. And the kid, and these kids all of a sudden are excited. They're telling their friends at school, we're sending mom to school. They're all excited. They're overjoyed that they're sending their mom to school, versus we can't afford a puppy. We don't have a puppy. All our friends have puppies. I wish I had a puppy. That's the power in this.
That's good. Now, it's interesting when we talk. Steve brought up social media and comparing yourself to the Joneses. What I've noticed, even within my family, is my kids sometimes want to compare their lives to mine now. So like if I take a vacation with my wife, they're like, how come we don't get this great vacation? And I'm like, you missed that point where I went and did my MBA at night before you were born for 3 years. Like, how do you deal with that? Because my kids are like ready to live my life now, but they have no experience and haven't done all the things. So,
Well, I mean, so once I move on from the mindfulness piece, the next thing that I find is the most, powerful, important is that time value of money, that idea of compound growth. And people in the financial industry, we really get it. And most people who aren't, they don't realize how valuable, $100 today is 10 years from now or 20 years from now. They don't think of it as, growing and becoming more and being worth more. And so once you can teach your kids how your money can earn money. So instead of thinking of what it can buy, but what it can earn, and show them some of that growth, then you can start talking about, hey, if I like these decisions I made in my 20s, that's what set me up. And if I could do anything differently, I would have been even more aggressive in my 20s and, invested even more and really taken advantage of that time in those early years to set me up for massive financial freedom in my later years.
absolutely. And then do you see a disparity across kids, even within the same family, same parents, where some kids are savers and some kids are spenders? And you could say, hey, I'll match some money in your savings account. And some kids are like, okay, great, I'm going to save more. And another kid might be like, I'm cashing out and going to the store now.
I love that you asked that because my response might be a little different than what you're used to hearing. Because most parents are like, how do I turn my spender into a saver?
Mm-hmm.
And I actually don't think that's the right approach because I've got a spender. My older guy is a spender. If he went to the mall with $0, he'd spend $0. If I gave him 20, he'd spend 20. If I gave him 100 or 200, he would spend it all. He would come back with a few pennies and change. Like he spends it all. And he's always been a spender. And that's even with me as his dad, talking about saving, talking about investing, understanding these things. He's a spender. And what I've noticed is he started to feel shame around it. And he started to feel bad about it. And that's what happens is we tend to shame our spenders. Whereas I'd rather not, it just breaks my heart when I see him feel bad about himself and that shame because he just thinks he's a bad person. So rather than shaming our spenders, I'd rather embrace it, allow them to be spenders, let them spend guilt-free. But like I said, if I give them $20, it will be spent. So instead of trying to change that behavior, instilling the habit of saving first. So we all know that, pay yourself first, save first, do it so it's automated. If that habit's instilled, then whatever's left over, if my son spends it, he still will be working towards a life of financial freedom. He will still have money growing for him and invested. And it puts a ceiling on that lifestyle inflation. So instead of trying to change our spenders, work with that, acknowledge that they are spenders, and develop the habits and automation so they can still be spenders without any worries.
That's good stuff. I mean, I know I have a couple kids that are spenders, and they have, I'm going to call it moments of clarity, as far as saving. And what they've said to me, and I've said this is an option, is let's open up a savings account, and part of your paycheck goes in there, and you don't even see it. But whatever's in your checking account, spend it if you want. So I don't know, Steve, you going to jump in there?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, I guess two questions. The first is what kind of success rate have you seen out of working with lots of kids? When you speak to them, is there like like when I talk, it's like there's people that show up at the front afterwards and ask questions. You can see the light bulbs on. Do you get a decent response, or is it, if you get 1 out of 20 that shows some interest, that's a success, right? Because you're dealing with such a tough audience.
It is a tough audience, but this is why I love this so much. Kids are an easier audience than adults So you start
Okay.
talking about these concepts and kids start getting it. Like I said, like that example was sending the mom to school. The kids didn't even need to be walked through that, figuring out that awesome stuff. They immediately saw, oh, between a puppy and sending mom to school, there's no question. And the same with these things about the awesome stuff. Like if I start telling them to think about all the things in their room, they want it all. But if I start asking them, like, well, what's your favorite thing? What's the one, what's the one thing that if your house was on fire, you'd make sure you grabbed? And they know immediately. But as adults, a lot of times we don't. And we might say it's something else, or we want to fight it, or there's some resistance, or we start saying, yeah, but what about this situation? This situation, it doesn't apply here and it doesn't apply there. Kids just roll with it. And so I've seen kids where they've cleared out their room and donated everything because they realize like this stuff doesn't bring my joy. It's not my awesome stuff. It has no value. Or one of my favorite ones is a little boy sent me an email, and he was talking about giving because it's one of the things in my book about give and you'll have more. And he's like, we're on the way to donate some clothing to a local shelter. And on the way, I found not one, but 2 pennies. And he's like, I didn't even get to the shelter. I didn't even give the stuff. And already I was richer. And you could just feel that wonder and excitement. Whereas adults, we might have just walked right by the pennies and thought, it's just 2 pennies. This isn't what I want. And kids still have that wonder and excitement. So it's really amazing working with kids. There's a bigger impact, and a long-term impact and a quicker impact for sure.
Awesome. I've got another couple questions that are rolling here from the group chat. Thank you so much for asking those. One's kind of a fascinating question because I was just like, oh wow, I don't have an answer. If it would be to ask to me. So you asked for a tough question. Here you go. What strategies might you use with a child/person who has trouble identifying what brings them joy?
This is actually a really common question
Okay.
because the reason that mindfulness is so important is because the way a lot of us think isn't thinking in the present and being just grounded and here. We're thinking of the future. We're thinking of a destination. We're thinking of somewhere we have to get to. So that's the same with this thing of like, what brings me joy? We feel like we need to have that answer and we don't want to get it wrong. And what if we get it wrong? That question, that actually is what that's where the power is in the pause and the question more than anything else. Just noticing it, because then you'll start noticing like, I don't know what brings me joy, but I know this made me happier than this. And spending time with this person, I'm happier than spending time with that person. Or these things that I thought I wanted, a week later, they actually aren't what I wanted. So that question starts to change things. And that's a big part of it. And then you can start giving examples and prompts because a lot of times we think it's a thing, but for most of us, it's not a thing. It's experiences, it's being with people, it's impact. So with the kids, I'd start asking, here's a great example that's very practical for parents. This past Christmas, my boys, because again, they cared less about things because of these conversations. Even the spender, like I said, he'll spend it and he'll buy a million things, but he isn't obsessed with acquiring things. He's just a spender. So when Christmas came around, like, hey guys, like I got some ideas as a dad of what you might want for gifts. I know you do, but I know there's nothing that you really want. But if there is, tell me. But instead of Christmas presents this year, would you rather have me host like a private party for you and all your friends? And that's what
Okay.
they wanted.
Yeah.
And again, and if they came back and they're like, no, what I want is this, this present instead, I'd be like, that's fine. Like that's noticing the choice. That's all it is. It's just noticing those choices. And it will continue to evolve and change, but it's just that comparison and awareness that there is a choice. And maybe for you, it isn't the new bike. Maybe it's, going out with your friends for ice cream or playing on the beach or going to a park. It's going to be different. And just to start noticing like when are they happiest? And as parents, it's easier with our kids. Usually we know what our kids love to do and we know the things they gravitate towards and the friends they gravitate towards and activities. It's a little bit more obvious. But yeah, just noticing those things. And there are good prompts, like thinking of, for some it's just even noticing, that favorite piece of clothing. What's the one sweater or shirt that you always wear? Or what's your favorite gift that you've ever received? Or like I said, if your house was on fire, what's the one thing you would want to grab?
Right.
And you start noticing those things. It really does. As you start to see those things, you can't unsee it. Once you realize, you know what, it's the photos in my house. That's what's my most important thing, not my shoe collection. It changes it. All of a sudden, that shoe collection has less value, and those photos and those memories have more.
Yeah, and it changes over time for sure. I was kind of, self-reflecting there of what would be important at different stages of my life. Can only imagine, with kids, changing in and out of this, things come and go so quickly. Our next question comes in from Mark. Thanks for asking. It's a kind of an advanced question, but I'll relate it. I'll kind of say that many of us, especially wealth management clients, we have means. And that when we raise our kid, it's easy to say yes to a lot of things. It's tough to kind of enforce that discipline because they see that, we can afford to buy whatever, they kind of want. So the question kind of becomes for success at what age group, because the mind continues to develop maybe up into the 20s or even after that. But at kind of what age group do you have the most success of trying to get this message across? And is there a point where it's kind of too far gone? If they enter adulthood and they've really never had anybody say no, is it a lost cause at that point, or what are your thoughts there?
It's really noticing choice. So it's going to evolve. So I wouldn't say there's a lost cause as you get older. A lot of what I try to talk about is awareness. So when I get pushback from people, it's because they think I'm saying, don't buy these things, buy this instead. That's not what I'm saying at all. So even back to when I was mentioning, the watch collection or the photographs, some people, the watch collection is going to have more value than the photographs, and that's okay. I'm not telling you which to choose. I'm just trying to make you aware of the choices. So when kids are really young, like when my boys were too young to understand like dollars and coins and all these things, I would refer to things in terms of like chocolate bars and Lego. So, you want this thing, that's going to be 10 chocolate bars. You want this thing, that's 2 big Lego sets. And then all of a sudden there's still, because it doesn't matter how much you have, there's still always a choice being made. So now they're starting to understand the value of money, what those choices could be instead. And then as they get older, like you said, are they too far gone in their 20s? No, because then those same choices are there. They just become bigger and bigger. And a lot of adults don't realize that, like one choice, for example, is freedom. That money could earn you money for the rest of your life and then be passed on to your children and their grandchildren. That can become a legacy. So there's a different choice now in, do I want, this house or have this wedding, or do I want 10,000 a year for the rest of my life, or whatever it might be, or to retire 10 years earlier, so, or achieve financial freedom 10 years earlier. So that awareness, that's the power in all this. And that's why I'm saying there is no answer. And like you said, as you get older, it'll evolve, but your kids might get it. Like Mike was saying that his kids want to do the same travel that he does. Then you put into, okay, to achieve this type of travel and this type of freedom, would you rather have that, or would you rather have this thing you just bought, or these clothes, or live in this house that you want? Or would you rather have some roommates, cut some costs so you could travel every summer? It's all coming down to choice. So once people realize that there's more choices available to them than they think there were, that's when they can start making decisions that are their awesome stuff and that bring them joy.
Okay, awesome. That is good information there. The one question that just came in, I thought is really good, and it's kind of a touchy one, probably maybe not touchy for the here, but certainly touchy for the U.S., right? But what role do you think schools should play in this? And do you know of any like national efforts to bring this strategy and or financial education officially to curriculum?
I'm working at trying to bring more of this into schools. And I know some states are starting to mandate financial literacy. I'm in Canada and the same thing's happening there. And I know when I first started this journey, I was like, this needs to be taught in schools. Like, this is so, so important. But if you've noticed, most of my conversation and the way I've answered most of these responses is less about the tactical and more about like your relationship and your feeling towards money. And that's something that schools aren't really well equipped to teach, because what's going to happen, just like we learn from our parents, we'll learn from our teachers, those relationships, like our feelings towards money are usually passed down. And that's a harder thing to teach. So I think that makes teaching this in schools a little tricky. I mean, one of the worst things would be, learning something about money that changes your relationship to it. Like I said, like the shame around saving. If you grow up feeling just like a bad person because you can't save, or you haven't developed the habits, or you consider yourself a spender, or if you feel like anyone who has money is bad, that's another, like, one of these, feelings and relationship and beliefs around it that you can learn and inherit. Those things are so much more important. So I do, if anything in schools, I would encourage just making it so it's an open conversation and kids can have discussions around it. But ideally, it'd be discussions around it with no judgment, no shame. No, this is what you should do. This is just information. Some people will invest, and this is how it will grow. Some people will choose to, give, and this is how they create a community. And some will buy all these things, and that's what brings them joy. So if they could teach it without judgment, I think it could work.
Yeah, that would certainly be a trick. I'll make a last comment, and then Mike, I'll come back to you. But I certainly, as you're talking, David, I'm thinking, reflecting on my own job as parenting, and what I tell parents out there is don't expect perfection. Just do your best, right? And it's the ultimate wild card on how things turn out. But I think of how I incentivize my kids like my parents incentivized me, and it may not be the best way, but it was that whole, like Mike was talking about earlier. If you put some, if you get a job and put some money into your Roth IRA, I'll match it. That's kind of matching. So I'm not sure I'm using the right motivations there. So I'll have to think about that a little bit more. But Mike, back over to you for your next question.
Yeah. I see on the website there that you're reading to a group of kids, and I'm just going to assume their parents are probably sitting in the background, or you've had that situation. I mean, do you see that as you're teaching the kids, some of the parents having the aha moment, like, this really applies to me as well?
For sure. So one of my sort of secret, not so secret things about the book is I didn't actually write it for kids. I wrote it for parents. So it's just that, like I said, it's harder for them to get sometimes. So the kids are learning so they can teach their parents. And definitely you start getting those aha moments. And it really isn't a kid's book. It really is for parents. All these lessons in the book, I've kept them simple, but it's just like things like, Winnie the Pooh or Dr. Seuss, where there's these little messages that seem so simple, but actually are so powerful. And yeah, it's definitely some of the parents. Usually what happens is they think it's going to be something light and fluffy. And then all of a sudden, like you said, they get that aha and realize, oh, this applies to me. This is changing the way I look at the world and view money and my perspective. And I love that. And that's actually what keeps me talking about this and so passionate about it.
Here's a question I have is the parents' money versus the kids' money, and how that, picks the items of awesomeness. I know if the kids had my budget, they could find lots of items of awesome. I mean, they'd be identifying, DoorDash from McDonald's as awesome. But when it's their money that they earned from their job, somehow it's a little more restrictive. But what's your view on that?
Well, and that's where it really isn't their awesome stuff. And I'll call my boys out on that all the time. Like, would you, like, they want it. And that's just like us as adults. We'll see something and we want things, and then we just want to just get them.
Mm-hmm.
But if we really have to sit on it and think about, well, what's the cost of that thing? There is a cost. Even if you had infinite money, there's a time cost. There's a headspace cost. It takes up, space in your home. Like, there is always a cost. So as you become more aware of those costs, and a funny trick, and I don't know if this is great or not, again, just like Steve was saying, some of these things as parents, we're just fumbling through it. But when my boys will ask me for something like that I just feel is like, I don't think they really want it, I'll offer to pay half.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're willing to pay for half the thing, then maybe that have a little skin in the game. Maybe they want it more than they did. But 9 times out of 10, maybe 19 out of 20, they decide that they don't want the thing.
I know I've tried that example where a kid's like, Dad, can I get a milkshake from McDonald's? Can you pull through? Sure. And then I'm like, where's your money? Give me your card, because they have a bank card. They're like, you're not paying for it? I was like, no. I was like, I buy regular food, and then it's like, well, maybe I don't really want that milkshake,
Mm-hmm.
Go
And
ahead,
that's
Steve.
and that reflection, like that is mindfulness, that reflection of how much do you want this thing when it's your money? Or how much do you want this milkshake when, it's $2 over here at, say, like, you know, a different store versus like a $12 milkshake at this other place. It's that those questions, that mindfulness, being present, that's what all of this is about. That's what gets you to really understand what do you really want, rather than just driving by and seeing something and being like, oh, I like. All that marketing is geared towards trying to get you to just react quickly without thinking. The moment we start pausing and thinking about it, our habits will change.
That's good.
All right. I got another question. Sorry to cut you off there, Mike. Another question came in. It says, how do you incorporate into your philosophy the value of having them work to earn for things that they really want? And kind of what age do you think that's appropriate?
Yeah, it's tricky. So there's a few things. It depends on what you're trying to teach them when. So I know tied to that is allowances and chores. And so work ethic's a big thing, but I do ideally like to separate financial literacy from work ethic, and teaching, to do chores around the house, to work, to get a job, to contribute, and seeing them as slightly different. You can approach them without combining all of it and making it a little bit messier. But what I would like, and I've got a bit of a different approach. Like my boys, they help a lot around the house. They do chores and they don't get paid for it. They just realize that's something they have to do. So they do have some decent work ethic. But my older guy, he's turning 15 or just turned 15. So he's getting that age where he can start going to the workforce and making actual money. And that's what I would like him to start to do, and work for that money. But again, I feel like there's so much time for kids to start working, earning a living, and I because I love watching them as kids as long as I can, I try not to rush that if I can help it. Because once they start working, once they're busy, all of a sudden all that free time that they'd have in the evenings for friendships, for sports, for traveling, for homework, it disappears pretty fast. So you got to sort of weigh what do you want to teach them? Do you want to teach them getting a job, or take, this small window of opportunity we have when they're young to do all these other things and have that freedom? But again, this is a question where, back to the mindfulness, it's, I think, better to pose it to them. That's what I did with my son. Here's this job will give you this money so you can acquire these things. Would you rather that, or would you rather we're planning a camping trip next weekend? You wouldn't be able to come with us if you're working. What would you rather? And yeah, a lot of times they'll choose the camping trip because it just seems easy and they're not working. But it also means they forego the money to buy those things. So that's a choice that it's going to be different with every child.
Yeah, you bet. And that whole the mindfulness, it's often like in the military. Mike and I both have military time. It's not the plan, but the planning is the value, because you've thought through all the different things. So I love that. I want to talk about your book just for a second. So we have the let's see, I thought I was going to go right to it. I'll hold it up. The Golden Quest here. So I know how passionate you are, and you already have had success both speaking and with the book, but I know that folks like you don't want to stop there. So what's kind of next? What's the roadmap for what's David going to be up to in the next year to 5 years?
Well, so I mean, it's not a lofty goal. But I just want to I want to change the way the entire generation of kids thinks and feels about money. So that's all I'm trying to do. And right now it's the book. Now I'm doing more public speaking so I can share this message. And that's some of the TV appearances as well. So people can start hearing a different way to think about money. I think a lot of times there's so much, judgment, and this is what you should do. And it's, it's not a focus on awareness and just having easy conversations. So I'm really trying to encourage that. And so, yeah, as I'm doing more speaking and sharing that message, there will be, I'm working right now with some inspiration, like an awesome stuff card deck that'll inspire these
Oh, nice.
conversations.
Yeah.
And yeah, and so that's the current product that I'm working on. But there will be so many different iterations of all these things. I've also got a great idea to do private tours with kids, taking small groups, and then teaching these things through a shopping trip. So they get actual spending money and start teaching some of these concepts, and they can choose to spend it or not. So some kids will come back with all the money and they'll just have it saved. Some will buy all these products. Some will give some of it. Some will be a combination. But just having those conversations and giving them an opportunity to, in real time, have money and make decisions. I think will be a really fun experiment.
Well, when you mentioned cards, I tell you, if you can gamify the topic for folks, I'm a buyer, right? I can always get the family to family game night if I can work a financial theme in there. We'll see how quick before they call me out for trying to trick them. But thanks, Mike, for your questions. Thanks, David. I'm going to hand it off to you for any closing comments you have. Before I do, though, if you want to get a hold of David, obviously you have to see the website here, daviddelisle.com. It's got all his socials, all how to book him as a speaker, how to buy the book, or just go to Amazon. But closing comments over to you, David, and then we'll wrap.
Yeah, well, thanks so much. It was so great being on here with you, Steve and Mike, and thanks so much for the questions. I hope you can tell how passionate I am about this and having these conversations. And I'll just leave just two things. One, just start having conversations with your kids, even having candid and vulnerable ones where you're like, I don't understand this money, or I wish I was taught these things. Why don't we find someone who can talk to us about it? Just having those conversations, so important. And then I challenge you to just, for 7 days, even every time you're thinking of buying something, ask yourself, is this my awesome stuff? Encourage your kids to ask the same question, is this my awesome stuff? And I think you'll notice after those 7 days, what you thought was important probably shifts just a little bit.
Yeah, you bet. All right. Well, thanks, David. And thanks everyone for listening. You guys have a fantastic weekend, and we will see you guys back Monday. Have a good one. Bye.
Thanks.